Here.
We have a quorum. Agenda item number 2 is the approval of the minutes of October 28th, 2022. Do we have a
So
motion?
moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Ms. Anderson?
Aye.
Mr. Bourne?
Aye.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Mr. Carp?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Mittlenberger? Sorry.
Stay.
Mr. Oshner?
Yes.
Mr. Salim?
Yes.
Motion carries. It's not on the agenda, but we do have a new member of DFAB, Matt Miltenberger, to my right. And he's agreed to share with the group a little bit about himself so that you know his background.
Well, thanks, Rich. Matt Miltenberger, originally from Southeast Iowa, but came out to Nebraska in 2000 for school. Did my undergrad, my MBA law degree at the University of Nebraska. After that, went out to Las Vegas, was director of government relations for Las Vegas Sands. And then 2013, Pete Ricketts called and asked me if I would come back to Nebraska and run his campaign for governor. So came back, managed that campaign. After he won, ran his transition and was his chief of staff for all 8 years that he was governor. So I'm very familiar with this board and watched it closely each year as we were working through our budget process with the legislature. Thought after he was done in January that I was going to have a few months off to figure out what was next, and God had other plans. So now I'm his chief of staff in the Senate office, so commuting back and forth each week between DC and Omaha. So I'm excited to be a part of the board.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome to the group.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. And the room looks a little different from this angle. From
Yeah.
the other angle.
I was never allowed back here the last 8 years.
Thank you. We're going to go now to agenda item number 3, and that's the election of chair and vice chair. The way this will work is we'll ask for nominations and kind of take it from there. If there is more than one person nominated for either chair or vice chair, we'll have a secret ballot vote. So having said that, I would ask, is there a nomination for chair?
Nominate Rich McGinnis. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, roll call. Oh, hold on for a second.
Okay.
Are there any other nominations?
That railroad was.
Was that a
going real
full-
fast.
I move the nomination cease.
Second.
Second,
Well, then we're going to have a roll call on that. Okay, so we have a motion and second to have the nomination cease. If there's no discussion, we'll have a roll call.
Mr. Bourne?
Approve the motion, yes.
Mr. Henning? Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Mr. Carp?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes?
Mr. Miltenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Oshner?
Yes.
Mr. Salim?
yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Motion carries. Now the vote for the chair.
Vice chair.
For
Full
the,
vote.
do we need to vote for the chair too, or? I think
Yes.
so.
Yes.
I think so.
Okay.
So we'll hold off on the vice chair just for a second. So we have a motion and a second that I would be the new chair of NEFAB. Roll call, please.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Mr. Carp?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes?
Mr. Miltenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Oshner?
Yes.
Mr. Salim?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. I'll do my best. Now we have the election for vice chair. Do we have a nomination?
I would nominate Dave Oxnard as vice chair.
I'd second that.
And we have okay. Are there any other nominations?
I move the nomination cease.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Let's do a roll call on that.
Get the show on the road.
All right. Mr. Carp?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Oshner?
Yes.
Mr. Salim?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Motion carries. Now we need to have a roll call for the vice chair.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Oshner?
Yes.
Mr. Salim?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Mr. Carp?
Yes.
Motion carries. Congratulations. Now, let's get to business at hand. Which of you two would like to start?
I can start tonight, borrow their projector so I can pass it one hand.
Great, thank you.
All right, so we, so the forecast here is based on the macroeconomic forecast from Moody and I think ISS, but I think we changed the name to S&P Global. I will remember to change that next time. But that's the latest forecast in February. Some of the table is on the book for the variable. So just a recap on what happened last year. GDP grew about 2.9%, which is more than a lot of people expected. And looking at 2.9%, we think that the economy is doing a great going into 13. Couple of things underlying that 2.9% that I want to get into a little bit is that the 2.9% incorporate a 1.5 percentage point is from increase in inventory investment, which is large for that quarter, and that tend to offset in the future quarters coming in because of less inventory, obviously, and they have so much left. And personal consumption expenditure also grew about 2.1% in that quarter. However, the underlying data on a monthly basis, PCE actually declined both in November and December after a sharp increase in October. So that's some significant in that 2.9% that might not last. That is one of the reasons why ISS basically called for a mild recession starting basically this year, first part of this year, as we get into that a little bit later. And then employment is great, market is great, 2.6% from Nebraska in December. We have the highest employment back in November of 1.049 million jobs, little decline in December, but very strong employment market. So ISS forecast, given what I said about consumer expenditure and GDP on inventory, they expect the economy to grow about negative 1.3% and then negative 0.2%, which mark basically the beginning of the recession, very mild, and they expect a rebound in the third and the fourth quarter of 0.7 and 1.8%. Fairly sluggish recovery from ISS for the forecast horizon. Moody, similarly slow growth for the first quarter, negative, but no recession for them. And then it's basically 1% for the rest of the year. So is everybody expecting a sluggish recovery or slow growth for 23 and first quarter 24? So GDP growth here, I mean, we can see IAS basically tend to be lower, Moody, which reflect our forecast as well. Unemployment, both services expect some increase in employment in 23 and 24. And then, but then ISS basically keep it stay at 4.5% for the forecast horizon, whereas Moody tend to be at around 4%. Monetary policy, the Fed is expected to raise rate 2 more times, at least based on ISS forecast, each time being 25 basis points, and they will not reverse until quarter 24. And Moody expect another one, 25 basis point. Consumer expenditure will likely decline gradually throughout 23, ending about 3% by the end of the year, and then the average for 24 about 2.3%. So it's take a longer time from 3 to 2 based on the forecast if we ever get there. It's the business cycle index that the Philadelphia Fed put together. This is the latest data. As you can see, the red line is from Nebraska. You can see the flat out of the since last few months, which shows some slowdown in the Nebraska economy compared to the U.S. economy, where the slope of that line is much steeper. You see that, so. Non-motor taxable sale, this basically directly translate into sales tax. It's important to know that here is basically since 2000, when the pandemic began, we have a very steep increase for the net taxable sale. But if you look at the whole period here, during the last two recessions, the line is a lot flatter. So we do expect some correction to make the line more flat instead of keep going up like this. I think we're gonna see some sideways to that graph.
Is that inflation adjusted?
No, this is not inflation adjusted.
So inflation will
Yes.
make a big difference in the sales tax receipts on that basis.
And here's employment data for Nebraska. It's still looking very strong. So nothing there. So now back to the forecast. This is where we stand today. So this is basically the forecast compared to the October forecast that last time we adopted. Sales and use tax run about 51 million behind. Individual income tax about 58 million. Corporate income tax 50 million. Above miscellaneous 5. So total net running about 53 million behind for up to January, not including February. February right now, with 2 more days to go, this is my best projection that we will be above roughly about 20 million. Strong withholding, little off on sales tax, but corporate income tax remains strong. So overall, I think for the month of February, we're going to be about 20 million higher than projected based on October forecast.
Is there any particular category in sales tax that's outperforming differently than others, or is it just broad-based?
I don't know that right now, but I think it's more of a broad-based decline in consumer spending. And especially last year when February last year was very high, and so January. So we can't really expect sales tax to increase 20-some% every year. So I think when we compare this number to 2019, I think it's so a very different story, which is very much in line with the baseline. If you assume sales tax increase roughly about 5%, 6% a year, then when you compare that to 19, it's actually showing about 12 or 13% higher for this year compared to 19. So I think it's a reduction in the sense that last year was so good, rather than this year it's not great. So here's our revised forecast for fiscal year 22-23 based on the last 4 months of tax receipt and the economic condition. Sales tax, we expected. Our forecast basically called for a reduction of roughly 44 or 40 million around that ballpark for fiscal year 22-23. Individual income about 125 million or 113 million, roughly 100 million, somewhere in that neighborhood for individual. Corporate income tax up 43 or 50 million. Miscellaneous up about 7 million. So overall, revenue call for forecast of 120 million reduction compared to the board last October, and then 91 for Moody. So on average, roughly 100 million or so.
What? Another question. This might be a really dumb question, but so unemployment's really low, wages are up a bunch. Why is there such a significant change in the individual income tax projection?
Individual income tax, I think this is a reduction to the forecast. I don't want to say the forecast was a little high in October, but later in the slide, I have like final payment withholding. We can see that component. Final payment will be lower. It's expected to be lower this year compared to last year. Last year was significant higher, and part of the reason last year was the CBO just put out a capital gain projection couple days ago, and in 2021, for the entire country, capital gain realization was about $2 trillion for 21. They expect that to decline to 1.7 trillion this year, and that's roughly about a 15% change in the capital gain. And on later slide, when we get to final payment, we have final payment declined roughly about 17-18% from last year. So that is where the individual is actually getting reduced. And then we put in a new withholding table this January to reflect the tax cut of 6.64% versus 6.84% last year. So that we have less withholding. Therefore, the growth in individual income tax will tend to be lower because of the tax cut and expected lower capital gain realization. Because at 2 trillion capital gain for the country, that represents roughly about 8.5% of US GDP, and the long-term average is about 3.5. So there's a long way to go to get back to the 3.5 capital gain realization data. So, but you know, capital gain is basically impossible to forecast and to have a graph of. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So we call for reduction in the forecast for current fiscal year. Next fiscal year, this I don't have the reduction in the forecast, but I have one on the back of the slide. But this is basically the forecast of the growth over the previous year that we have the forecast on. So ISS basically, sale and use tax grow about 5.1% or 6% for Moody for the next fiscal year 23-24. Individual income tax grow to roughly 1 to 2%. Corporate income tax a reduction about 16%. Miscellaneous 4.4, 4.2. So total net receipt 6.356 billion, 6.479 billion, which is about 0.5% higher and 2% higher based on ISS and Moody from the previous year forecast. And keep in mind those, like you said, the individual income tax, like in 24, we have another withholding change to take the rate down from 6.64 to 6.44. This will continue until 2027. 24, 25, again, individual income tax about 1.6%. Sales tax, we'll see a lower growth. If inflation is expected to play out correctly, then this should decline. Total net receipt about 1.2, 1.5%.
Is the corporate income tax a rate issue?
Some of the rate is we do cut the rate on corporate income tax as well, so it built into that thing.
Because that's a large reduction, but if it's driven by the fact that we reduced the rates, that makes sense.
Both the rates in here, and then again, every time when we do corporate stand at 7.5 million last year, very high. We don't expect corporate income tax to keep growing, basically. With the current high interest rate environment and earnings coming out, we do expect some reduction in corporate earnings.
What's the difference? How much of it is the rate? How much of it is the?
I cannot figure it out. It's somewhere. I don't know what the rate is. That's a fiscal law, but that which I don't memorize. But it's in there. So here's the gross sales tax. We grown very fast last year, and then we expect some decline for the next 3 fiscal year. Just a general, like ISS and Moody kind of expect a flat out or slow growth in the economy. So that's reflect on our number here also. Net income tax, we grow this year just because the refund is a lot smaller. If you look at the growth, then it's growing 7%, but the net growing about 10%, just because the refund on incentive and things like that will tend to be lower this year compared to last year. Last year was significantly high, 200 million. We expect that to decline. Individual income tax call for negative 5% reduction, roughly. and then increase very slowly for the next few years, just because of tax cut and everything else. Withholding is growing nicely, and then but next year we have a kind of a reduction in withholding, slow growth there, and then kind of a reflecting the tax cut and the macroeconomic condition. His final payment. So final payment, if you look at the whole chart here, you're going from negative, positive, negative. So last year we stand at 775 million, which is very, very high compared to any standard. Like I said, so we reduced this by 70% this fiscal year, and based on the report on CBO, I think that is in line with their projection on capital gain. Another reason why this dropped so larger is because the property tax credit refund, there's a community college part in there, which is about 50 million, which is not in the last year refund. So we expect some of that to show up on people tax return. They have a higher refund because of the new component on the property tax credit refund, individual income tax. Estimate payment pretty much flat, roughly around 500 million for the next 3 years. Refund, so this is where our refund go up. Last year at 743, this year we project about 900 million. I think some of the PTC start to show up for people even claiming back to 2021 for their managed return. So if they forgot about it, and then for the next few months, when people doing their 2022 tax return, they realize how big it is, then they might go back and claim more of the 2021 tax return. We just don't know that, but it's expected to happen for those people that missed out on the last 2 years. So we think refund will be higher, and then it's fall back to at least ISS falling back, where Moody keep going up. Because if you look at in the withholding, Moody have a higher withholding forecast compared to ISS, and when you have higher withholding, refund tend to be higher because we just withhold more people. So we withhold more money than we refund more money out. At corporate income tax, we basically have a reduction for the next 3 years, roughly 10 to 15% every year. Again, last year at 715 million, so it's a 2 significant increase for 2 years. It's hard to explain. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know why. So it is what it is. Miscellaneous forecast, pretty stable, really. Up to except for the one component in there is interest and investment, which we jacked it up pretty good for the next 3 years, just because the balance and the interest rate are very high compared to previous years. So total net revenue, 0.4% reduction this year, 0.5 increase next year, 1.2% increase the following year. Moody 0.1 positive, 2%, and then 1.5. So this is basically our forecast in summarize compared to the October adopted forecast, fiscal year 22-23, ISS, basically for all 3 years. We tend to see a reduction of 120 million for ISS, and Moody declined this year, but somewhat stay flat to your October forecast last time. And that is all I have. And
Can you go back to the last slide for a second? I just want to.
that slide, yes.
Okay, so those are real dollars, not inflation adjusted dollars.
This is real dollar, yes. Taxes are nominal terms, so everything we present here is.
So in reality, depending upon what the inflation rate is, it's even less than.
Yes,
In terms of purchasing power.
Yeah, the forecast here is basically based on inflation rates start to gradually decline throughout this year, get to roughly about 3%, between 3 and 4% by the end of this year, and then working toward 2.0%, the Fed target rate in 24 and 25.
Thank you. Any questions for Wafu? If not, Keisha?
Okay. 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 All right. Let's start. Yeah, so Walter's already covered a lot of the information, but we'll go ahead and go through.
You have to get space, that's just a lot.
You said hit the button. Okay, I don't really need help. Thanks. Okay, so I kept this slide in. This just goes over when the meetings are. Obviously, you know that the February meeting, 4 months since the last meeting. We're just kind of checking in, 4 months of actual receipts, 4 months of change from in terms of where IHS and Moody's their economic data for the US and we review our models and kind of just see how things are going since October. So, and Wafu did cover this also, but so here we are year to date. With 3 processing days left in February, we're actually 4.5 million below forecast. But like Wafu said, we may end up ahead for February because of what's left to be projected for the month of February. So that may be a little bit misleading for February, but you can see for November, December, and January, it's 53.7 million. I don't think you really discussed this. In November, it was mostly a sales tax refund, one large sales tax refund that kind of brought the November net receipts down. In December and January do offset each other somewhat in that regard. This I included just to show variance from October by month and by category for sales tax, individual tax, corporate income tax, and miscellaneous tax. It does also indicate that in line with the forecast results, the actual receipts for the past 3 months, and this holds true for February also, they have been up in corporate income tax and miscellaneous tax, but generally down in sales tax and individual income tax. And that's true in gross receipts, and also that our refunds have been higher for individual income tax and sales and use tax. So this shows a little bit more of a breakdown by category. And it shows that in general, our gross receipts have been fairly close to the forecast through January. This does not include February, this is just through January. But they've been fairly close to the forecast because the gains in corporate income tax and miscellaneous tax have offset the variance from the forecast in sales and use tax and individual income tax. However, where the variance has really come has been in the refunds because of the large sales tax refund, which is shown there in that first line under refunds and credits, that extra $58 million there. And then in addition, the individual income tax refunds are about $33 million above the forecasted individual income tax refunds so far above the October projections, October forecast, sorry, for those 3 months. So in general, the net receipts then are about 53.7 million below the October forecast. So that's kind of a breakdown by category.
Are you ever given any advance notice by corporations that they're going to be asking for a sales tax refund?
Well, we certainly aren't.
No, we don't. If there's a really, really big one, and we might know about something, but the timing of it, no. If you recall, like the last couple of years, we carried that very big refund in sales tax for a while before it's trashing. So for the next 3 years, our refund basically stayed roughly about 110 million in that neighborhood for incentive refund. I'm pretty sure one of those numbers will be a lot higher, but I just don't know the timing of when some of those big ones
I know they're not required to tell you, I just didn't know as a practice that sometimes corporations might give you a heads up that in 6 months, we're going to be asking for a refund. That doesn't happen in real world.
No.
Just one.
Keisha, these charts are helpful. I'm looking to see if I missed them in the book.
These were not in our report. We could include them, I suppose, if you think.
That would be a good
That'd be
idea.
helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we'll do that for next time.
thanks.
So,
So 1 month. That's what you-
I know, next time there won't be very many months, because our next meeting for April, but we'll
Yeah.
continue to
It
include
helps
October. Yeah,
to-
for,
it actually helps to go back to see the whole year.
yeah, for the whole year, yeah. So these are some kind of selected factors that influence our forecast, as Wafu said, that we use data from Moody's and also from IHS, which is now S&P Global. I didn't change it in my slide either. But what I did is I took some selected factors from the October baseline and then also from the February baseline to kind of show what's changed, I guess, in that time period. So this isn't everything, obviously, but these are some selected factors to show what's changed in the past 4 months. And there have generally been some areas of improvement since October in their baseline forecasts for both IHS and Moody's. There's more optimistic growth in GDP for 23, 24, and 25, business fixed investment, exports, personal consumption expenditures. Although with personal consumption expenditures, Wafu did mention the caveat that both November and December were both lagging. The quarterly number was kind of spiked in October, and then so the average looked good, but the monthly data wasn't quite as good for the end of 2022. But there is some less optimistic information for the February baseline as well relative to October. In that regard, specifically the monetary policy, as expectations regarding peak interest rates and the timing of that peak, they've increased slightly relative to the October baseline. And then also inflation. Core PCE inflation was 5% in 2022, and then gradually they expected to slow to 2.6% in 2024, which is slightly higher than the estimate that they had in the October baseline. Not a lot of difference, but just a slight difference from the October baseline numbers. And they are still projecting high prices and higher mortgage rates that lead to lower demand for new and existing homes and a decline in prices in the housing market and that sort of thing. Although they did note in their report that generally mortgage costs have declined considerably since October, which is helping that. So that's one more positive thing. There's also a lot more positive signs in the labor market, which Wafu mentioned. There was a very strong jobs report in January, despite layoffs in certain sectors like tech and retail. And unemployment nationally was as low as it's been since the 60s, I think. And it's still very low in Nebraska, obviously at 2.6%. Moody's, I didn't include that on the slide, but their information was even more optimistic than IHS. IHS still has a recession for the first 2 quarters of 2023 in their baseline, and Moody's does not. And generally, the Moody's numbers are slightly more optimistic. So those are some factors that went into the forecast. Yes.
This might be my favorite chart that you've ever presented, so. Showing
Mark
the
that one number one.
yeah, well, yeah, so showing that difference is really helpful as we look at the situation. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll do that again too.
Good.
So this is our forecast for the next 3 years for both IHS and for Moody's. And then I included a comparison to not the board's forecast, but the comparison to the Department of Revenue's forecast estimate for February for these 3 years too, our revised forecast. I think, which is relatively common, our forecast is a little bit lower on sales and use tax and a little bit higher on individual income tax. So you can see the differences there. Generally, we do have a little bit of a difference too in the third year in miscellaneous taxes, and I think that goes back to what we talked about at the October meeting relative to interest on investments, and when we anticipate the interest rates to start coming down. I think generally our forecast anticipates interest rates to come down just a little earlier maybe than the Department of Revenue's forecast does. So that would affect probably mostly miscellaneous tax in that third year. So those are probably the most notable differences. I did also include rate and base adjusted growth rates. These account for the tax changes. These take out, they make manual adjustments for the tax rate and base adjustments due to legislation. So these are growth rates based on just the economic factors relative to these particular taxes. So you can see that there is a pretty strong growth still in sales tax, over 5% the first year, and then about 3.5% the following 2 years. Individual income tax is closer to 4% the first year, and then 6% the next 2 years. Corporate income tax is relatively flat the first year, and then does decline relatively significantly the second year. And then it does see a little bit of an incline the third year, and then miscellaneous taxes, we see an increase the first year, and then it fluctuates a little bit more. An increase, a decrease, and then an increase, slight increase, and then a decrease. So, any questions about that? Yes.
So this is probably a really dumb question, but are gambling taxes figured into the miscellaneous taxes?
Yes.
And is there any increase assumed because of the new casinos coming online?
I think not really, because I think as an overall portion of the miscellaneous tax, it's a relatively small percentage. So, yeah, it's relatively small at this point.
But interest drives the bus. Interest is a big part of it.
Right now, I think it's most of it, yeah.
And so
Most of the change anyway is because of the interest.
I know you're projecting that the interest peaks and then starts to fall in March of 2024. Have you got the similar projection?
Yeah, I think we're kind of anticipating that it's gonna maybe start to come down maybe a little earlier than that. Maybe like January. Is that fair? Yeah. January 24. Yes.
You ready for another dumb question? This winter has probably been the toughest winter that we've experienced for probably 20, 25 years. And being in the food distribution and transportation business, I can tell you, I've got a calendar that tells you the number of days that every interstate system from Kansas to Canada was closed. From past history, how does the impact of a winter, a bad winter, impact our numbers? And I mean, traffic, we could see this last winter just came to a halt. And both inbound and outbound, and I mean, it was really significant.
Yeah, well, I think one of the bigger impacts it might have is in consumer confidence and personal consumption expenditures, because I know it, well, these, and maybe this is just my opinion, I think it is my opinion, but I think when you have a situation like that, I know, especially in areas where people are, they live further distances from places, they may just be less likely to want to go spend money. They just have less consumer confidence. It's just an overall mindset. When things are closed, like local businesses are closed, there's still the option to maybe purchase things online or have telework or that sort of thing, but there's a lot of local businesses that are closed, there's local roads that are closed, and I think it does have an impact on overall consumer confidence and personal consumption, and that does have an impact then on sales tax, and if it goes on for an extended period of time, it could have an impact on businesses having the ability to retain workers or those sorts of things too. But I think the most direct impact is probably on personal consumption.
And I guess I was thinking more of the sales tax factor. Over 50% of the meals are eaten away from home, and those are all taxable.
Yeah.
Where groceries aren't at the grocery store.
The bigger impact on the weather, maybe on holding construction. In previous year, when we have a month where there's a lot of very bad winter, we have bad winter this year too. Sales tax is take a hit if there's a lot of snow. And then what next is the construction, where you see withholding start to decline, which we did see it this year.
I think one of the things that is really hard to estimate, and that's the amount of pent-up demand there is out there from people not going anywhere, from having the bad weather. And my dad would always say, whenever that happens, people go out and spend money like drunken sailors. So we'll see if that's true or not, you know. But I do believe that there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand out there. And I think we hit some warm weather here in probably another 2-3 weeks, 30 days. I think we're gonna find that. Hopefully.
Have you guys considered the effect, primarily in the out years, of all of the ARPA money that the state's kind of sitting on is going to come out into the system? And then on top of that, we've got the Inflation Reduction Act money that's going to be coming out in the system, and what kind of effect that's going to have, because in the out years, that could be significant to us.
Inflation Reduction Act, I don't believe that's a macro event. It's not big enough to be a macro event. That being said, Inflation Act and the ARPA money, not at the state level, but also being built into both the ISS and Moody estimate.
So, but it was built in when it was signed into law. We're sitting on it here in the state while we figure out the most responsible way to spend it. So it's going to get spent at some point.
I will say, relative to the ARPA funds, a lot of the, like the state coronavirus fiscal recovery funds, those funds, a lot of them necessarily haven't been spent, but relative to a lot of the other ARPA funds that went directly to state agencies, a lot of those funds have already been spent. And in terms of the magnitude, a lot of the other COVID relief money through the CARES Act that went directly to individuals or directly to
Great.
companies, all of that, the magnitude of what's left, I guess, is actually quite a bit less relative to what's already been distributed. So in terms of how it affects the forecast, I can't remember where it was, but there was a chart, one of the, either an IHS or Moody's tables that the magnitude of the federal assistance at this point, like going forward through calendar year 23 and 24, is relatively small by comparison to the federal assistance that's already come through in 2021, 22. I guess it doesn't move the needle in quite the same way in that regard. So I wish I had included
Sure.
the chart.
I don't remember what the total amount is, but it's like $1 billion, right? That's still waiting to be dispersed here in Nebraska. And the multiplier effect on that could be quite interesting. And I think it's something we should consider, both in income and sales and all sorts of things, as that comes through the system.
That's true, it is, but we've already had about, I want to say 22 or $23 billion of federal assistance through the other CARES
No,
Act and ARPA programs.
I
That
agree.
has been, so, I mean, yes, I agree that all of it is something to be factored in, but in relative magnitude, it's
Yeah, the difference, I think, a lot of this is going to specific projects that are going to take a while for the money to chew
Yes.
through the system. And so that's why I think the multiplier effect is going to be greater than, a lot of the CARES Act money was.
Another thing that we can consider is that, so this ARPA money and whatever been spent, has been for the last 3 years.
Mhm.
Some of that already in the baseline of the forecast. So when we build that out, we're using the base as a starting point, if you will. So when you build that out, if whatever not spent, we kind of carry whatever spent for the last 3 years going forward for the next few years, because that's how the forecast is being drawn out. So you have to take a starting point and then you go to that base. So whatever increase in the ARPA money with respect to the two components should have shifted the line up on our year as well.
That's on the national forecast, right?
No, that's our tax data.
Okay.
That's our tax data. So we don't do it basically outside of the model, but the model should have incorporate some of that inside when we run the regression. Because regression is based on past data, which past data already included some of that spending, which moving forward.
Did you say that you didn't think the Inflation Reduction Act was significant?
That's what ISS is claiming. It's not big enough to become a macroeconomic issue.
I thought it was like 900 and some
$1
billion.
Over 10 years. It's very long time.
Okay, so
They
it's,
do have an increase in GDP for the next couple of years by 0.1 or some percentage point. But to move the needle on the national economy, they say it's not big enough. And so they're still walking. They say it's not big enough to be classified as a macroeconomic event.
okay.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to ask.
How many dollars are in the rainy day fund presently?
A lot.
Yeah. The current balance, I think, is 1.6 billion.
Great.
And that's what we're earning interest on.
Yes.
This is a question for both of you. And of course, in your analysis, you rely on Moody's and IHS. And am I right in saying that over an extended period of time that the forecast of Moody's tends to be typically more optimistic than IHS?
Correct.
Okay.
So this is from what I see, I don't know what you see.
In my limited experience, I would agree.
Has anyone, either in the state of Nebraska or other states that rely on both of these services, gone back and analyzed IHS and Moody's to see which of those two tend to be more accurate over an extended period of time?
I would say that ISS is being straightforward with their forecast. They call it the way they see it. That's why they put in a recession in their writing at the last October forecast. Usually forecast services don't do that. They do not put in recession in their writing. They might talk about it, but they're not gonna do it. But last time, actually, ISS did that. Moody, they tend to be very drop off or increase. They don't go with the normal line of growth. So if they see something more positive, they will shoot up their forecast very high. And then if they see something negative, they drop it way faster than ISS. So I think they rely on more shock system on Moody, whereas ISS basically based on historical average more than Moody. I mean, if you listen to Mark Zandy and the guy Joe Franklin from ISS Moody, you can basically see some of that.
Regardless to me of the philosophy that they use to come up with their numbers, if over an extended period of time, one of those services tended to be more accurate than the other, that as making a business decision, I would personally rely upon the one that showed more accuracy. Right now, of course, you weight both of them equally the same, but based upon their analysis, the numbers they give you, you don't penalize one for being inaccurate over an extended period of time.
We don't do the average of the forecast, so we present the way they do the forecast. But to answer your question directly, based on 10 years I've been doing the forecast, also ISS always give me a more comfortable number than Moody.
Okay.
I sleep better with ISS number when it comes out than Moody.
It's too early for you to.
Too early for me to say.
Okay,
It's
that's
only
good
my
enough.
second one, I can't say.
Actually, we've been only used Moody for the last,
I feel like they haven't been around as long though, and I think that my predecessors would say that they also relied more on IHS.
Yeah.
Just because they've been around longer and they are
We use them
more
a lot.
established, yeah.
That's good enough. Thank you very much. Well, if there aren't any other questions, first, thank you and your staff and your colleagues for all the hard work they put into bringing these forecasts to us. Makes our job a lot more accurate and a lot easier. So please pass on to the folks that we appreciate all their effort. What I'd like to do now is to go to agenda item number 5, in which case each board member is asked to, if they would, provide a snapshot of economic activity in their area and any other relevant comments they would like to make. And Tom, if we can, we'll start with you at your end of the table. How's that?
Okay. The activity in our area, probably in central Nebraska, has been rather brisk. And a lot of projects going that I mentioned, that you and I mentioned the last time, that are continuing and that look good. Probably there's help wanted signs posted all over. And I mean, there's still a large shortage of labor, and probably in the skilled areas for manufacturing. And talking to the manufacturers that are out there, they're still having some challenges with, probably not, they're having challenges with chips, but a lot of other electronic equipment for their machines and everything. And then in healthcare, I mean, healthcare is really, they've really got a big gap there to fill. My wife was in the hospital for a week, and I couldn't believe the number of local tenants that, the hospitals, both hospitals employ. So, the supply chain issues are probably getting better. The inbound fill rates of a lot of the people in distribution, whether it be any type of product, they've improved substantially. In fact, I think there's kind of a feeling out there that we're just really close to that new norm. And I think in our industry, we're seeing that. There's a lot of things going on though up and down the Platte Valley. Broken Bow, and you take Holdridge, you're on fire, and North Platte's going to have that new packing plant, which is going to make a difference. And my thought processes are, going much further than North Platte right now. So that's real exciting. Quite frankly, I'm optimistic about the year coming up. And if we have a recession with the inverted yield curve, it certainly points to it. I read an article the other day. They said there was only one time in the history of the yield curve that it didn't point to a recession. But so the odds of probably having a mild recession are out there. But I think our economy is in good shape. Probably the only real challenge has been the weather. And I mean, when you look at what has happened up in ag country, we haven't had this much snow since I was a kid. And you get up in the sand hills, up in the cattle country, and I mean, they just get pelted on. The good news, and if there's a silver lining there, the water table is up, the rivers are flowing, and that's going to be good for agriculture. And I think there's a lot of optimism there. So, of course, being a Nebraskan, I think we live probably in the best place in the nation. The other thing I might say is we distribute in the states from Oklahoma to the Canadian border and from the Mississippi to the Front Range. And I got to tell you, I think Nebraska is in the best shape of probably any one of the states out there that we, and I could give you numbers that point to it. So I guess I'm totally optimistic about, what's coming down the road. I might have been born optimistic, but anyway, into my diatribe. So.
Thanks, Tom. Zach?
As you heard Tom mention, it's a real winter out in western Nebraska, which fortunately is leading to real moisture, which I think our ag community is going to benefit quite a bit from later on in the year. Right now, it's kind of tough. It's a tough winter. I've had more opportunities to tell some back in my day stories about winters than before. Maybe not as many winters as Tom, but in the bank, a lot of ag loan renewal activity, which those conversations are fairly positive this year. Over the last 10 years, you've had some really good conversations with those borrowers and really tough ones, but this would be a very good year. Still a lot of liquidity coming that are in those operations moving into the next year. Obviously, cattle market or cattle feeders a little different this year with the winter that they're having. We'll just note that, the liquidity that we see from customers is down as you see them spending some stimulus money. And so that coupled with what you see on the consumer side with consumer borrowings up, rates up, a lot of uncertainty there. One thing that's encouraging to me that leads me to be more optimistic about 2023 is that you do have a lot of, like we've heard about, this ARPA money, state, county, city projects that haven't happened yet. And so, as I see consumers and businesses and their liquidity or ability to fund things go down a little bit, hopefully that's offset by some of those government things. And so it just kind of gets us through maybe a little downtick in those overall projects. Still very competitive labor market out there for good talent, competing on wage and flexibility. So that's encouraging, I think, from an economic standpoint.
Thanks, Zach. John?
Well, I guess as a construction person, most construction people are a little more on the negative side than the optimistic. I know I stopped this morning and bought my Powerball tickets, and I know I'm going to win, but I'm not sure how long I'll work, so take it for what you want to make it with. So my comments are pretty much the same as last fall, but maybe just a smidge different from the people I talked to. Well, to say the sky and falling in construction is not correct. Everyone I talked to has some concerns looking out past this year. This year really still looks good. In our area of construction, we certainly have positive momentum at this point. Nationwide, in all of 2022 starts were 15% up from 21, but residential was down 3%. I think that's probably pretty obvious. January of 22 to January of 23, residential starts nationwide went down 34%. Non-residential was down 2%. In talking about ARPA funds and infrastructure funds, non-building starts, roads and infrastructure were up 10%. Manpower is still the number one issue. Apparently nationwide, there's 388,000 open construction positions nationwide. Supply chain issues on big electrical, big HVA components, anything with electronics, just like Tom said, is still a problem. The rest of the stuff is there. You're going to pay for it, but it's there. While the construction backlog is still good for contractors, architects are reporting that billings have started to drop nationwide since late October of 2022. One would think that'd affect construction after 24, 25, but we'll see. One Omaha architect reported to me that this year really looks good for the firm, but they're starting to feel a little bit slower. Nothing they can put their finger on, and much harder to predict the future than it was even a short time ago. Right now, he says everyone seems to be running around trying to get stuff done. But some of the bigger projects, at least the ones he's involved in Omaha, they seem to be dragging their feet a little bit. It's still there, still going to happen, but kind of dragging their feet. So I don't know if that's financing. I don't know. Local Omaha electrical contractor I talked to says still having huge issues with the big items, transformers, switch gears, anything to do with electronics. Other items are readily available, but certainly have been cost increases. Steel's up about 30%, and concrete, in his words, is ridiculous. Now, I don't know what's driving concrete to have these cost increases. I don't know if it's transportation or what it is. The industry feels this is really positive, that there's 10 more years of data work, mostly in Council Bluffs and up and down Highway 50 in Sarpy County. He says they're going to build all the way to the river. There are people that know that I don't, but there's a lot of data work out there, and we'll see. He says there's a lot of long-term work to bid with a bunch of mid-level stuff. He feels if something went wrong in the economy, it could be stopped pretty quickly. His number one issue in local areas, manpower. Number two is the lead times on big equipment. He'd say it's even if you pay 2 times the cost, you won't get it any faster. So the equipment seems to be somewhat setting the schedules for the projects. Developers are not shopping around for more land right now, just content to go through their existing lots. I reported last time that transformers on the ground, like in a subdivision, are a huge issue to developers getting power to their lots. And the developer I talked to says it's getting resolved very, very slowly. And then I should have asked, and I didn't. I wonder if that's because the lots are slowing down, if it's that big a deal now, where it was super hot before. Federal Reserve reports in this area, wages are up around 7%, which is great, but in real earnings, because of inflation, it's actually only up about 1%. So there you go.
Thanks, John. Matt, your first time?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, and to start off, I just want to say kudos to the board to looking at the data that's been presented by revenue and LFO to basically be looking at changes of 1% or less is pretty impressive. And would have loved that from the governor's office coming into a February meeting. I mean, our first few years, I was worried about how much you were going to take it down. And the last few years, we were even more scared how much you're going to take it up, because that's when it really got scary with the legislature and the lobby. So this kind of flats is nice to deal with. And I'd also just say, and Keisha kind of pointed this out, I think in these odd years, this February meeting is really kind of just a check-in meeting. And it appears that the big indicator for how we're going to do is the April 15th receipts. And so if there was ever a year to just keep the status quo, or meeting to keep the status quo from October and kind of push it off to April before making any real changes, to me, this just kind of seems like the time to consider it. So.
Thank you. Leslie?
Piggybacking off some of your comments, there's still, at least in the Omaha market, there's still a shortage of lots compared to previous years. And you're absolutely right. The developers are really frustrated because they can't get utilities to the sites to get the lots turning. We are seeing for the first time, although, just 1 or 2 buyers fall out who could qualify, 9 months ago, but with the rising interest rates aren't qualifying now. but those are being turned. Interest rates on the mortgage side have kind of stayed in the same, they're down a little bit, but they're not 3% anymore. And people got used to them being 6 or 7. So a whole new group of borrowers came through who knew that that was what the interest rate was going to be. And so they're still in the market because we still have a relative shortage. The only other thing I would say about our market is we are beginning to see commercial customers who sat on and built cash reserves. They took their COVID money and just sat on it because the economy here was pretty good. And we're starting to see them need to use some of those funds now, primarily the ones that are consumer focused. So some of those small businesses, they're retailers or restaurants, some of those folks are having to because of inflation, and they're the little guy, the consumer's habits are going now back to big box. And so they're having to use some of those cash reserves, primarily due to inflation. They're also having such trouble getting employees, folks that want to work in the restaurant or want to work at the pet store, or, they're just really having trouble getting staff. So they're having to cut back on hours, which then cuts back on top line. So we're beginning to see some of that. The good news is for Nebraska, they're sitting on most of them are sitting on cash reserves. So I think we'll be able to weather the storm. We need more people to take those jobs.
That's right. Thank you. Steve?
All the way over to me. Okay. So I'll piggyback a little bit on what they're saying. First of all, I appreciate what Matt said. I don't know whether we deserve the compliment, but we'll take it. And frankly, you're probably right. At this point in time, we're pretty flat. So the Omaha market is still short of housing. I saw a study the other day that said that we're 50,000 units short in Omaha, which is an enormous amount when you think about it. And that being said, I know that people are having trouble penciling out the next apartment complex. If you drive around Omaha right now, there's apartment complexes going up all over the place, and they're having trouble penciling out the next one that's going to come in because the interest rates are high enough now that it's driving people to stop, which I think is what the Fed's wanted us to do. I mean, it's kind of a crude weapon that they're using to pound the economy down, but that's exactly what's happening. Meanwhile, we're about to build a 44-story building in downtown Omaha, which is going to cost $600 million. That's a pretty big. That's a pretty big stimulus for the Omaha economy that will cause labor shortages and all sorts of other shortages. Again, I'm very interested in the inflation numbers that IHS and Moody's are pointing out, and I'm not nearly as optimistic as they are, which makes me not nearly as optimistic about when the interest rates are going to turn down. I think there's some structural inflation that is out there that is not going to go away. I think as we deglobalize and we bring a lot of the stuff back on shore, we're going to have to raise the rates. And I think we're also going to find out that as the Russian war or the Ukrainian war drags on, and that drives the price up, which should be good for the farmers in our state, but it's also going to raise the price of food every place that we go. So I see a lot of problems out there which are not necessarily going to make our tax revenues lower. They're just going to be problems that would have to be solved. And in a lot of cases, they're going to be solved by just inflating the numbers and paying people more and doing things like that. And as inflation goes up, that's actually good because we're talking nominal numbers as opposed to real wages. So we may not be as rich, but we'll have a lot more money floating around. So that's just my comment.
Thanks, Steve. John?
With longer daylight, my backyard hens have started laying again. So I'm personally feeling very wealthy with a surplus of expensive eggs. So feeling very optimistic right now. There's been a tough winter in the cattle industry in a state like Nebraska that is so dependent on the cattle industry, both in terms of feeding and others. The cost of gain numbers coming off of what's been a kind of record winter in many ways is going to have a filter through impact We're also at a historic low in cow herd size, which should mean that we're on be headed towards an upswing and a new cattle cycle. Doesn't appear that that's happening right now, especially with other costs, interest rates, feed costs, availability of grass and others. So it'll be interesting to see if the ag economy and Nebraska's economy in particular kind of moves and follows this very odd state that we're in terms of cattle cycle, coming off of a really tough winter in cattle feeding country and a calving season that has started off pretty rocky. That said, there's a lot of big, I think, transformational infrastructure projects that are underway out in central Nebraska. A number of them that I'm associated with have now delayed their timeline. So interest rates, supply chain issues, labor issues have meant that the projects are still going. Transformers, I mean, if you've got anything that needs a transformer right now, you're looking at 18, 24 months lead time. So the projects are still going, but they're being stretched out, and the timelines and some regulatory uncertainty. I think there's some things that happened in the Inflation Reduction Act have also created some big infrastructure changes there. So we'll see what that does in terms of local growth. Another kind of interesting note in my kind of 5-county area in south central Nebraska this year, we've had 2 really, really large family farms, several thousand acres apiece, that have sold in one chunk and brought record prices, which is great for those landowners. Interestingly enough, none of the bidders involved were Nebraska bidders. So one was 4,000 acres purchased in one large private transaction to a UK-based company, and another was a several thousand acre family farm sold off in individual units on auction, and all of the bidders were out of state, and the final 2 bidders were Texas investors. So optimistic in the sense that land values are doing well. Nice if you have that paid for land, but interesting to see how that will play out, to have ownership of those fairly large swaths of productive Nebraska farmland move outside of Nebraska control and be seen more as an investment as opposed to a farmer operator. So again, optimistic if you have money. If you're not necessarily appearing in these because a lot of your income is you're not in the income tax bracket, or you're looking at child tax credits or below those income thresholds, or a lot of your expendable income is in things like food and non-sales taxable issues, I think the economy is still rough and getting rougher. And so it's important to always keep those individuals, those Nebraskans, at the forefront of our decisions as well.
Thanks, John. Dave?
Yeah, I share Zach's enthusiasm on ag side. South central Nebraska, corn, soybeans, where we're at. A lot of our guys still have excess liquidity. They're still spending their own cash on their inputs. Our loans we're renewing right now, we're raising rates to keep up best we can with what the Fed's doing, but not getting a lot of pushback from our guys, mainly because they got their own money to spend first. And so it's pretty encouraging. Right now we've had some decent moisture this winter. So we have no worries right now with any of our ag guys. So that makes us feel a lot better at the bank, and also share Tom's enthusiasm too. I think outstate Nebraska is in a good spot right now.
Thank you. Well, just a couple comments. I'm from Kearney, and it's been mentioned that the unemployment rate in Nebraska is very low. And I think the Nebraska Department of Labor preliminary statistics for Kearney in December was 1.8%. I think there's any person who has a desirable skill set today who wants to work. I don't think there's a better time in the past maybe 10 years to try to improve one's salary, benefits, compensation. There's just so much demand for people, and my suspicion is that there are companies that are stealing from other companies because there just aren't that many available people in the state of Nebraska. So I think there's a lot of pent-up wage inflation that we may not have seen yet, that may be coming down the pike. I serve on the Kearney Planning Commission, and we deal with a lot of developers and residential and commercial projects. there's usually a time frame between 6 months to maybe a year, year and a half from the time they come to the planning commission and get approval to when they're doing their construction work, et cetera. And I've noticed the past 6 months that although we're still having, developers come to us, the numbers have declined. And I'm not surprised by that because interest rates are higher, as we were talking about earlier. But I don't think we'll see the real effect of this until maybe 6 months to a year down the road. Now, having said that, there's still a demand for housing in Kearney. There's maybe 25 homes for sale in a town of maybe 33,000 people. Some homeowners are reluctant to sell right now and to maybe downsize to a different house because they may be going from a 2.5%, 3.5% mortgage rate to a 5.5%, 6% rate. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Plus, although home values in Kearney haven't declined that much, they have declined some, probably throughout most of the state, I would think. So when people start thinking about how their home might have been valued a year ago, they're reluctant sometimes to put it on the market for less than that. They think that's a loss. It really isn't a loss, but in their mindset it is. Other than that, the only thing that I'd mention to you is that bids have gone out for the sports complex, which I know, Tom, you're familiar with in Kearney. I think the original estimated cost was 34 million, but that was maybe a year ago. So my suspicion is it's north of that in terms of it. But that's a 210,000 square foot enclosed facility right off the interstate in Kearney that'll have many basketball courts, volleyball courts, pickle courts. It'll have a track area, and it will, when it's built, bring a lot of business to central Nebraska in terms of tournaments as well. So that's a really big event for Kearney that we're looking forward to. That's all I have at this point. Unless there's some questions or any additions.
One other question, or one other comment, segue on Leslie's comments. I read an article the other day, and the transportation industry is probably 2 years behind in replacement of their equipment. And that's where we're at. We haven't been able to get equipment. And the comment was, in every industry that has got, some planned obsolescence out there, highly depreciable products that they have got on a schedule, they're all behind. And that's got to be a real stimulus for the economy out there, probably. And I know in the manufacturing industry, that's a big thing. In fact, it has also contributed to some of the supply chain problems that you have out there in probably the food industry right now. But anyway, that's going to be a big deal, something that doesn't get any press along the line, but I think it's going to be significant, probably contribute to a little bit of inflation too, but anyway, for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you. Okay, hearing no other comments, let's move on to the next agenda item, which would be 6. And that would be the forecast for the fiscal year 2022-23, which would be.
I don't want to take us off our agenda, but I'm wondering, based on Matt's comments and Steve's earlier, if it wouldn't be appropriate for us just to reaffirm our October forecast. We're very close. We've heard that our February numbers are probably low. The February numbers that are coming in are probably low. We'll have a whole lot better information in April, and that we just reaffirm our October forecast.
I would second that notion and call it a notion right now, because there probably isn't a motion out there on the floor. And I got to tell you, the last few days, as I've gone through the forecast and everything, that thought has entered my mind, because I think we might be in a little bit of a slump. And I think by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year, that we're going to be probably where we forecasted. And we're not off that far right now where we're at. And you look at the conditions that are out there, I would certainly be in favor of something like that.
Yeah, at the risk of making our April meeting more important. But frankly, we don't know enough to make a lot of changes right now. April's when we're gonna know some stuff, and that will be, if some of the stuff that you think is gonna happen in April happens in April, then it's gonna be significant. It's gonna be a significant meeting, but right now, we just don't know enough to make any changes, I don't think.
Can I ask a question about that notion? So when we're making those comments, are we more talking about the overall total? Because some of those subcategories under that, I mean, there are some statistically significant differences, or is that not a issue and it's just you leave them all the same?
We have the opportunity to true up in April.
So I think what I'm hearing in terms of the notion
Yeah.
is that if you take a look at the forecast sheet that we all have, and you look at, for example, fiscal year 2022-23, where it says current NEFAB October 2022, just reading it left to right, 2.4 million, 3.2, 575, 270, total of 6.445. I think the notion is that we as a board would approve those numbers today and not tinker with them. And any changes that we would have, for example, that fiscal year would be done at the April meeting. And then if I can just go a little bit further on your notion, you would do the same for fiscal year 2023-24 and fiscal year 2024-25. So essentially, there would be no changes at all from the previous October meeting. Any other comments? Those of you that haven't said anything so far, I mean, this is the time to say if you think it's a good idea or not.
Do you need me to make it a motion so that we can have
Yes.
discussion after? Okay, so I will turn my notion into a motion.
Sounds like a rapper.
I can't rhyme it, but I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. You want to restate your motion so that you get it clearly.
So my motion would be that we, I
Reaffirm.
guess, ratify or reaffirm our October forecast for this forecast.
For all three.
For all three fiscal years. Okay, and you second that as well, Steve.
I second that. It gives Matt a chance to jump on board with us and get hit on.
Okay, now officially, go ahead. This
Question.
is open for
Just
discussion.
a question. Statutorily, all this is, this means nothing.
Right.
This forecast, I mean, it's, we're not stepping on our tie if we just go.
Well, there's nothing in the statutes that tells us how to do this, so we can, as long
We
as
can do
it's
anything we
as
want.
long as it's reasonable,
As long as it's reasonable.
we can do it.
I can think of.
Okay.
Yeah,
And-
at least once,
Yeah.
yeah,
And-
we've done it before.
And, you know, the message that we would say is that, you know, we feel more comfortable in keeping what we did in October than trying to tinker with it today.
Very good.
That's the message.
Mhm.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, so we have a motion on the table that would cover all three fiscal years. Let's do a roll call.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Oshner,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes,
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you both. We're working on that. Okay. The last item that we have is agenda item number 9, which would be to select the April board meeting. We've been asked by staff if we would be available and open to changing the date from Friday, April 28th to the preceding Wednesday or Thursday to help them at the end of that calendar, that year, that month. I tried to do it by email, but it became a little too complicated, so I thought it'd be a lot more efficient to do it.
Rich, I'd move for the 26th on Wednesday.
Okay, now the 26th, morning or afternoon?
I've got a conflict in the morning, but I can do the afternoon.
You what?
I have a conflict that morning, but I could do the afternoon.
So,
Afternoon's great.
Afternoon's fine.
Room available? Rooms
Yeah, we should,
available?
we should have a room available, that's fine.
now, if anyone can't make any of these, you won't be judged if you say that you can't make it. We want everyone present, so we're being real flexible. And that's why the morning is out, because one member can't attend. I'm fine with the afternoon. Is there anyone else that would have to, man, I can't remember, was there?
Wednesday looks better for me than Thursday.
It does, good.
Are we talking one, like afternoon, like 1 o'clock meeting? Is that what we're?
Yes.
thinking, or-
1 or 1:30 usually.
Yeah,
It's 1 o'clock.
one would be,
1 o'clock.
or 1:30, either one.
Yeah, no
Yeah,
one
if
is.
there's no difference between 1 and 1:30, I certainly prefer 1:30 over 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Okay, 1:30, good. So we need a motion and a second to have the April meeting on Wednesday, April 26th.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Second.
We got a motion, thank you. And a second, any discussion?
It's 1:30.
On Wednesday.
Not 1:30. Okay.
1:30.
1:30. We have a motion, we have a second, no further discussion, I'm not hearing any, so let's have a vote. Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Oshner,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes. Motion carries. Do I have a motion and second to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Oshner,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger.
Yes.
Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Stay safe and warm.
There you go. Thank you, guys.